Rumors are spreading about ICE sweeps here in Texas. They're currently happening in these 9 areas across the country, including Houston. But a post getting a lot of traction online warns people about an ICE checkpoint on Highway 71 in Del Valle, heading east toward Houston. ICE denied the rumor in a statement, saying, quote, ICE does not engage in so-called raids or checkpoints, and ICE officers do not randomly stop people to inquire about their immigration status. Any suggestion or rumors of that kind would be untrue, irresponsible, and potentially dangerous to the public, end quote.